Hello, everyone. My name is Emilio Di Grazia. That's quite a mouthful there. And it's very Italian on this very Italian evening. And I'm speaking on behalf of my colleague, Ken McCullough. He and I sort of put together these First Tuesday events where we bring together people from the community to hear and experience original work done usually by people from the region. We're here tonight to celebrate a lifetime achievement in a way by a man who is no longer with us. His name is Peter Denzer. His book is called Chiaroscuro. Here it is. Chiaroscuro is an Italian word. If you are into art and appreciate the works of someone like some wild man like Caravaggio, you will understand what chiaroscuro means. It implies clarity and darkness, but it does not imply black and white. Black and white are terms that are polarized, and I think they are dangerously polarizing today. And I kind of wish at times they would go away. Chiaroscuro implies that there is a clarity that comes from darkness. And Peter Denzer is someone who experienced darkness. He was one of the very first to enter the concentration camp at Dachau. He saw firsthand thousands of bodies piled on top of each other, and he saw others still alive like ghosts. It was an experience that never left him. How could it? This experience he had to balance with a heart very much alive and a mind that was profound and radiant. And from that mix of the darkness that he experienced and the clarity of heart and mind, we got Chiaroscuro. The book, it took a long time coming. It's 25 years old in a way. I began working with Peter Denzer on the book about 25 years ago, and it was incomplete, okay? And just as we were about ready to go with it, he decided to shut it down. So here we are. There's a strange convergence of the stars that got me introduced to Maria and Peter Denzer. On June 18th, my son Dante was born. And at 4 a.m. in the morning, I left the hospital in La Crosse and drove to Lanesboro, Minnesota, to the art park fair there. At the time, I was celebrating the birth not only of my son, but of a novel that had taken me about 12 years to write. I'm not trying to sell it tonight, I just want you to see it. It's called A Canticle for Bread and Stones. And there's a main character in the book that reads like the life story of my son, who was born on June 18th, the very day that I met Peter and Maria Denzer. It was my moment to bring the book out, okay, in Lanesboro. And across from me in the park were Peter and Maria Denzer, these strangers whom I suddenly discovered spoke Italian. Thank you. That was a revelation. We immediately hit it off. immediately, and we became good friends. We ate a lot of dinners together, and for Peter, the required main course was garlic. It's something that I thought deserved to be a main course. With those dinner table conversations came a lot of talk, a lot of smart talk on the part of Maria and Peter, and they were wonderful moments. So it's a privilege, really, to finally put together this book that took 25 years. And Tom Driscoll, who is the publisher, probably thought it took 100 years to put together because it kept getting bigger and better. It's full of lino illustrations, some of which you can see over here, examples of it. It's a big, beautiful book full of, I think, Peter's best poetry, and there was a lot of poetry. There were hundreds of poems that we chose from to make this book. I want to thank a whole bunch of people here. We need to start, of course, with Shipwreck Books and Tom Driscoll, the sponsor, the major sponsor for this program. Tom is right here. If anyone has a book brewing in him or her, capture Tom and get a conversation going, okay? We also want to thank Daryl Lang of Second Chapter Books, who's a co-sponsor, and also the Friends of the Winona Public Library. They've all chipped in to make this event happen on the first Tuesday. And of course, we want to thank the Blue Heron for opening their doors. And I need to remind you that we live in a special state. This book was made possible through a grant from the Southeast Minnesota Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Government sometimes does very wonderful things. The Italian connection goes back to Florence, Italy, where Peter met Maria, the love of his life, and where they developed an interest in pottery, art, gardening, smart talk, and wonderful dinners, okay? And so here we are. Peter was a remarkable person. He had published several novels with major publishers in New York, in addition to boxfuls of poetry that we sorted through. His experiences in World War II were extensive. He worked in Italy and was editor of the major U.S. newspaper there. He had interviews with Ezra Pound, when Ezra Pound, who was an enormous influence on American poetry, was in his pro-Nazi stage, okay? That made him even more interesting. I think I will read two poems and then let some of the other people connected with this book, and there are several, give you a taste, okay? So get ready for some garlic and for some chiaroscuro, okay? The clarity that is in darkness. I will read first a poem called Dear Girl of My Dreams. You are so clean, and house, sky, and street are all so clean. I see the blue there, so blue and undisturbed, past believing. And even my hands are clean. And I can take a deep breath, and the air is safe and clean. Let me take another deep breath, and let me touch your hair, your skin, and then let us lie still on the bed, and I will move carefully just to feel the sheets clean, and with the smell of them on them, of the clean sun and clean air. They gave us new uniforms, stiff new boots, and we were clean. But I could still smell the bloody mud. Can you smell it on my skin? The sickness of the earth? The dead cling to me, cover me, pull at me. They don't want us to abandon them, our friends, brothers, and enemies. And then there are friends who till gardens where I toil. This is dedicated to one of Peter's very dear friends who has written one of the introductions to this book, called Peter Anastas. No one labors alone, abandoned, lost, isolated, framed by salt seas and discovering only sand and a few poor weeds to frustrate starvation. We die anyway, voiceless. Conversation is salvation. At its mother's breast, the child suckles, pulls nurture from the teat, but also from air, filled with maternal song and murmur of mother's voice. This dialogue of friend to friend, lover to his mate, wife to husband, this is the the nourishment that enriches not only thee and me, but crossroads, town and nation. Here on sagging shelves are books from friends who tend my mind as diligently as my wife tends our garden. Here are files stacked on desk and tables, a steady tide of letters that bring me other worlds, distant cities and landscapes beyond my aging reach. I am not marooned. I shall not die at sea. Salted sand and will need no rescue from a voiceless silence. My bookshelves rise up around me and defend me from speechlessness and utter ignorance. My wife and friends will talk to me, give me their voices and their ears, that I may speak to them. Ken McCullough, my colleague, and will read a couple poems next. Ken keeps trying to be Italian. He's been working at it for several years and has done some damage to this poor guy. So he's in recovery mode here.
Buonasera. Come va, Bruno? Chiaroscuro. Questo è un bellissimo libro. Chiaroscuro. La luce imbraccia l'oscuro. Pietro Denzer era un bravissimo uomo, bravissimo. Michelangelo Berissi da Caravaggio era un grande artista, però un ragazzo attivo. Cimabue, Giotto, Masaccio, Frangelico, Raffaello, Caravaggio, Chiaroscuro, Chiaroscuro, Chiaroscuro. Grazie mille. Che Dio vi benedetta. Now for one of Peter's poems. House, garden, fence. What have I traded for this? And what have I here? House, garden, fence. I have marked my territory as jealously as a cat, and wonder if it's altogether decent to take a space and proclaim private property, no trespassing. House, garden, fence. I follow the line that meets itself after it embraces what is mine and taxable. I sigh in enormous comfort and give up yesterday's freedom from the cares of ownership. At dusk, I cover tomatoes against the frost. In October dawn, I admire hardy rosebuds that promise blossoms. The world is on the other side of my fence. Somewhere, there is a war, but I turn it off and wait for music to follow the news. Your turn again, Amelia.
Next, Jake Gibbs, Greg will read a few poems. This is a neighbor. Imagine that. Neighbors.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Jake Griggs. My parents, John and Linda, are here. My sister Amanda, I know, would love to be here if she could. And yeah, I mean, neighbors are measured in miles in some parts, and you know, we were kind of the next valley over. But our family has known the Denzers since shortly after they came to rural Houston County and set up shop. I know my sister spent an awful lot of time helping throw pots, and granted, they moved to the area at a time when I was kind of exploring more of my life and who I am, so I didn't have an opportunity to know Peter. I met Peter a couple times, and I know Mary much better than I did Peter. But this book was really an amazing opportunity to kind of get to know Peter. It's kind of strange in reading what is in here. It's almost like this extended conversation, like he's kind of still in the room. It's really pretty amazing. And he had a way of connecting with the world around him that created some immediacy through his ability to kind of find these small moments and connect them to things much larger than that. So I went through the collection and I picked out a couple of pieces that really resonated with me, in part because some of these poems really speak to the area that we come from, that we call home here, both as kind of transplants. You know, we moved to the area when I was a kid. So the first piece, I've got a couple selected here. The first piece I'm going to pick, likely if there's a setting for a poem, this likely took place just down the crushed rock road in Chisholm Valley, just down from Seven Bridges Pottery at Daly Creek. It's a place where I spent quite a bit of time, both as a kid and continue to return to. Fishing. The morning dark with frozen mist hanging, cold in the air, and telephone wires beaded with frozen pearls. Robins flick through the frigid haze, spectral aircraft searching for worms tunneling below the frost. Somewhere trout lie dark shadows and cold water seeping from a spring, and I weeping under the brow of a wooded bluff. The fisherman warily breaks through the mist. The morning is precious, solitary, brief. A spasm of juncos plunges through the fog, dragging with it the first rays of today's sun. The next piece I selected, again, comes through observation, but also this really interesting intersection of art and science, which is really interesting to me as well, when you can get those two worlds to kind of weave together. And again, Peter did a job in finding those pathways and bringing them to the reader in a way that packs a punch in a fairly short amount of lines, not a lot of lines. This is called The Sunflowers. Whoever named them must have known what only lately has been shown with calculations and telescopes. The mass of petals arranged like solar flares around a honeycombed interior. The seed row swirling outward from the center at a ratio shared by the chambers of a conch shell, the Milky Way's arms, and a labyrinth of mandala. And then, standing there in a field, how they reveal the unsettling truth that the sun we always believed to be unique and ours alone is only one of countless other stars, each pulsating, each shedding light on a swarm of planets circling like bees, like us. So another piece that I feel like is really tied to the land and through some pretty astute observation, but also weaves in an ability to kind of speak to a perspective that predates all of us existing here, to the Native Americans that were here long before we were, in what I think is a very interesting way. This is called Late Spring. Ancient Anishinaabe faced April blizzard without our words and definitions for April and blizzard. For them, no glazed freeways, no snow-blocked driveways where young men collapse, and where the aged, lonely poor do without the warmth of tribes. On a still cold morning, yesterday's stockyard stink remains chilled in the river valley, while the tight fist of new buds open cautiously, and the long, pale green fingers of unleafed elms reach into a dawn's cool embrace. Ashinabi old man grins among his weathered wrinkles. He still, as the morning before, this cluster of cities was poured on the prairie, and before freeways flattened the forests and pit mines trapped the clean old winds. Somewhere between the warmth of tribes and the stockyard stink, there is a moment to breathe. The cardinal sends his feeding call trilling. He loops from branch to branch and settles a moment in a scatter of seeds on a parking lot. And finally, the last piece that I chose, which was really interesting to me, kind of pays tribute to the smaller moments that we all kind of experience. There's a little bit of Italian in here, so I really hope I'm not butchering this, but I'm going to do my best. But it's the last piece in the book, and it's also a prose piece, so it's a little different than some of the other pieces in the book, but I really like how this kind of wrapped up the entire collection. Tutto sommato, summing up. Sunlight floods the leafless forest back of my house, and I am flooded by that brief contentment which is amplified by its brevity. I have a clever machine with which I make espresso as good as all the espressi I drank in Florence, Rome, Naples, Milan, Agrigento, not to mention the numberless small towns through which I passed or where I paused to savor sunlight, wine, and pasta. Before the brightness warmed the morning, I built a fire, and the hum of the furnace fans, the quiet rush of air heat through dusty ducts brought comfort to contentment. Tutto sommato is the small thing that at my age gilds the day even as the sun rising over the eastern bluff lays gold on my forest. A cat followed me into the furnace room. Her small voice told me she worried that I might be eaten by the fire. I sat down to write a letter, and she leapt into my lap, not to be denied her share of my morning's contentment. Tutto sommato, it is this feline passion, along with sunlight, coffee, and my wife still serenely asleep in our bed, that fill me with the brief contentment amplified by its brevity. Tutto sommato, with this summing up, reach to the receding edge of this swelling universe, past all the small things we think we know, and tutto sommato, I briefly transcend the limits of my contentment, which is brief but amplified by its brevity.
Thank you so much. We wonder, don't we? Poetry can be so weird sometimes. On the other hand, we sometimes read poems that suddenly make us pay attention in a way we never have before. And I think Peter Denzer's poems do this for us. John Nickel is here. He's been here before, and he hangs around Lanesboro and Houston, and he's going to read a couple of poems.
There we go. Hello, everyone. Unlike a lot of the other people here tonight, I didn't ever have the honor, the privilege, or the pleasure of meeting Peter. But through this book and through reading through it and getting to be a small part in seeing it come together, it made me feel like I missed him in a way that is both, the feeling of somebody being gone and also the feeling of like two souls in the right place at the right time, but not the right place to see each other. And so we just miss. And so I'm just going to read a few of the poems from this book. I have 6 of them laid out. Some of them are pretty short. Don't worry, I'm not going to be up here for too long. But these are some of my favorites that really make my heart feel ways. So yeah. This one's called Magic Tricks. There is no magic, only eyes that for good reason see or go blind. There are no gods, but shadows thrown on the wall by fear and the anxiously important I. Music tells its own truth and cannot be transposed, although it's rearranged, piano for violin and orchestra for guitar. The white world of winter sings for those whose ears are tuned to hear what eyes see. The green world of spring also sings for all those who hear the winter symphony. So sing, sing and feast, make love and war, swing horsehair bow across strings, bang your drums within the roar of demon cannons. And the arche and the logos, in the beginning was the word, but it was a sigh, the first of 12 tones. And this next piece is one that really resonates with me. It's called Like You Know Like. Your eyes are like twin ash cans, just emptied, and your eyelashes are like, well, like, sort of like, well, like eyelashes. Just sometimes what it is the right word, you know? This next one's called Dollars and a Kiss from My Wife. In the economy of love, what is my wife's kiss worth? What is it worth to wake up in the morning? And how much does seeing the first bluebird cost? I knew just how much I paid for the bottle of wine my friend and I drank up the other day. And so is that the bottom line? Should I have sent him a bill? What's my friendship worth to him? An economist told me that the value of my labor in the garden makes the vegetables we grow for our table too expensive. Subtract the price of my pleasure and pay me, I said, for the pleasure you experience at our festive board. But I have taken all his calculations to heart and committed them to paper, and with a slide rule determined that life is too expensive for most people. This one's a real short one, but it just is the right words for it. This is property rights. My house lies deep in the woods. Bold gray fox steps wet dew through my backyard. My house, his woods. And then, haha, this is 2 oak leaves. No breath stirred in shadow or sun. The silence did not breathe. I walked in stillness, the only movement in a silent world. But then I saw 2 oak leaves trembling in a tiny private rush of careful air that keeps the forest breathing and alive. And last, but probably the longest, a blown leaf speaks and I listen. It blows across the dusty road, neither infinite nor insignificant. A dry leaf, oak brown, and soon dust, leaving behind a brief aromatic shadow in memory. Dry leaves rattle through stripped branches as the forest becomes penetrable, and the eye wanders among thick stems of oak, butternut, poplar, birch, aspen, hackberry, hickory. Names flee, but shapes, smells, and colors remain and return, the seeding, birth, and death of trees. We who must also die salute you. I too will float to earth and be ground to dust to nurture mycelial threads so new fruit can thrust through forest floors. A descending leaf alights, dancing in this annual ceremony. I lie resting among the crisp shards of summer as leaves begin to cover me. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I want to remind you that we have an open mic session that will follow an intermission. We'll have a 10 or 15 minute intermission. And I'm going to send a sign-up sheet, so if some of you have a poem lurking somewhere inside your wallets or hearts, you can sign up and read the poem right here at the mic after the intermission. But before we get to the intermission part, I'd like to bring Maria Denzer up here, who is really the shaker and mover of this book. Of course, Peter's beloved wife for so many years, and such a bright, beautiful, wonderful, creative woman. So she will have a few words and maybe answer a few questions. Please keep this moving. And don't forget to speak into the mic.
Okay, thank you all for coming tonight. It's lovely to see friends and neighbors and everybody else here. We started working on a book when Peter was alive. I would say our grandkids were 7 and 10, and we all worked at the house with some poems and some prints, and then things happened in life, and it got put off for a while. And then we took it up again about 14 months ago, and we got a grant to help us get through it. But 18 members of our family and friends made 108 lino prints for the book. So almost every poem, 83 poems, have an illustration. And the kids started with illustrations when they were 7 and 10, and now the 7-year-old is 17. So it took us a while to get it all together. But we had a good time. I have to thank Tom Driscoll for his patience, because he didn't expect such a lengthy book with so many prints, and it went out for a while, and then I broke my leg and I was in rehab for about 3 months. And Delia, I have to thank Delia Bell for taking over and taking it all up and putting it together when I was not able. But she managed to bring me tools and linoleum to the rehab place, and we continued with our prints and organizing the book. And then also Emilio has pulled out the poems and made chapters, and that was all fantastic, and Ken helped, and everybody helped with it. So a lot of people are responsible for this book. And it's something that Peter would have liked us to do, and I'm very proud of what we came up with. We have a little display over there to show you exactly how we put together the linoleum prints. You do a drawing, and then you do a carbon, and you put it on linoleum, and then you use chisels and then print the ink, black ink on it. And we wanted to have the Chiaroscuro theme throughout it, so the whole book is black and white. And that's really what Peter was. He was dark and he was light, and you all who knew him knew that. But anyway, do you have any questions? Anybody? Okay. No? All right. But anyway, we'll have books up here. Oh,
That's my question is,
there are books up here for sale, yes. And we have some books, and Delia and I will sign them. And because I don't know, I mean, we were the sort of the shakers on a lot of it. Maybe Tom will too, because he had, oh, can you hear me? Now you can hear me better. Oh, they weren't hearing me at all? Should I start over? Okay. Yes, question, Tom.
Well, take a moment to talk about the process that you and I and Delia and Emilio, as well as Beth and Ken and others, went through on the numerous revisions, expansions, additions. It was a memorable experience.
Well, it was 14 months or so of many meetings between the four of us and many revisions, and we kept adding through to the prints. I don't think Tom expected there'd be 108 prints that would go in the book, and they all had to be placed in the poems in the proper place. And we had to really well, actually, as Tom says in the publisher's note, we had to corral everybody to do this, and then to select a poem and do a print that kind of matched up with the poems. And it was interesting. It was very interesting, and I have to thank everybody for their patience, especially Tom and Emilio and Delia on this whole thing, because it was a long process, but it turned out very well, I think.
Well, I might add, we started with 50 poems and 50 prints. And so the expansion was considerable.
We kept sneaking things in, hoping they wouldn't notice, but I think they didn't say anything at first until they really realized what we were doing. But we were having such a good time. We had everything. We had my whole kitchen set up as a place where we printed, and we had the whole dining room was all chisels and linoleum and drawings and things and books and everything, stacks of books, to sort of for reference. And so it just kept expanding as Delia is my pottery apprentice, and I've been making pottery for 50 years, and we had to, make a living and keep going with that. But once we got on to making the prints and everything, we were having such a good time, they kind of increased in number, I would say. We didn't notice it, but I think Tom and Emilio noticed, and we kept picking out. I kept finding poems that were my favorite poems, that Peter would write these poems. And I was with him almost 50 years, and he'd come up, he got up at 4 in the morning, and he's a morning person, I'm a night person, and he'd come up and he'd open the curtains and say, I've just written a poem, and so he would read me the poem that he's just written. So some of the ones that were read tonight were my favorites, because I remember when he wrote them, and he'd wake me up, and they're very sweet. But anyway, yes, there was another question over someplace back there. Yes.
Just a couple of comments. I read a lot of poetry, and so I'm kind of jaded. And I expected in reading this book that there would be a dead spot here. It's not.
Well,
It's really a beautiful book.
it's remarkable. Now, the story about Ken is that we would have a dinner party or two, and Peter Anastas, who wrote the introduction in this book, the first introduction, Amelia wrote the second introduction to explain the Chiaroscuro, but one evening we were having dinner with Ken and Lynn and Peter Anastas and his partner and Peter and me, and who else was there, and we were drinking a lot of wine, and suddenly the old Tuscan came up, and that's what Ken was doing. I remember somebody had glasses, and they had a napkin, and they were doing the Toothless Tuscan, which is poetry with where is Bruno here? Where is Bruno? He understands the Toothless Tuscan.
I just learned it.
Oh, you were up in, yeah, you were up from northern, anyway, it was quite rowdy, and it was exactly what Ken did tonight. And it would get out of hand, they'd write poetry and tell stories and everything like that with the napkin and the Toothless Tuscan. A lot of people were toothless in those days when they got older. There weren't a lot of dentists post-war.
I forgot to take my teeth.
Yeah, their teeth should have come out, right, too.
One thing I should say about Peter, after he was in the assisted care facility, I exchanged letters with him. And, he'd be talking about something that was going on in Slovenia, and then he would say, of course, you remember that incident when King Osoko back in 1421, captured blah, blah, blah. And of course, I just sort of, yeah. He knew so much.
Yeah, well, he traveled around, and he ran a newspaper in Germany, the first English language newspaper. I think it was in Stuttgart after World War II, and so he was around there and went to Italy first in 1960, and then I met him there in 1964, so by that time he was fluent in the toothless Tuscan and Tuscan Florentine Italian, which is a special lingual. But what else, Emilio?
Other question?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So the Italian title of the book is so beautiful, and I'm not sure there's a proper English translation for it.
There isn't.
So can you talk about the title in relation to the poems a little bit?
Well, you already talked about, the Chiaroscuro was something that we decided that we wanted to use because a lot of the poems in this book are light poems and they're dark poems. They're war poems and they're light parts, and he sort of was that way. He was light and he was dark. His poetry's light and dark, so it was the obvious thing to use Chiaroscuro. We don't have a word in English that is quite like that. And then the Caravaggio and even Michelangelo, some of it, Leonardo and the light and dark and everything, and Renaissance painting and everything is that way. So it's sort of connected up. And we intentionally, except for the back of this book, is all black and white. And the prints are all black and white. So we sort of wanted to.
If I could add, there is a title poem, Chiaroscuro. There are prints entitled Chiaroscuro, and I think through the linos you see a very deliberate visual attempt, even in black and white, to address that. As I understand it, because I never knew Peter, although he possessed me. 6 months at least, I was 14. The light and the darkness of Peter's poetry is not quite as subtle as the artistic Leonardo, the Italian Renaissance painters who discovered that you didn't need a fine line between the shadow and the bright sun on the skin. They learned to do chiaroscuro.
Well, also Italian opera is light and dark. You get those silly moments in some of the operas. The clowns, for example. At the last scene of the clowns in English, it's called. There are all these dead clowns on stage, and the last one comes out, and he says, "What is it, Bruno? La storia è finita," or something like that. Stabs himself. Everybody's on the dead on the thing and the curtain goes down. I mean, hello. I mean, it's supposed to be a funny opera, but I mean, there are dark and light parts, and that's what opera is. And Italians are that way, I think, a lot of them. I mean, it's just in the culture. Well, we are too. We just maybe don't see it as clearly. We don't have a word for it, maybe that's it. Okay. Oh, is there a question?
One quick,
What?
reminder, a lot of people in this room,
Do
you
you-
all remember, or many of you remember, Primo Maggio, as it was celebrated 1st of May, which is not very many days behind us, which was celebrated for a lot of years in Winona. And Emilio, I know you remember, because I think of your mother, very elderly woman, walking through the fields and singing and gathering wildflowers.
Yes.
And I remember many of you that attended those wonderful days when Jack and Pat Lucas were still alive, and the wonderful connection that so many people have to their Italian heritage and culture and so on. And it would be a wonderful thing to revive someday, because it were beautiful times. I know many of you were at these things, where we walked through the fields and we did what they do in Italy on the 1st of May, which is going out into the country and gathering flowers and wildflowers and having a wonderful evening, usually outside on a table. And we've kind of recreated that for a number of years. So I just wanted to mention it because it was such a beautiful time for so many of us.
Okay, all right, you can take over.
A final word about chiaroscuro. It's a very difficult word to translate. I come to it from a different dialect, Calabrese, which is Southern Italian, not the Northern snobby Italian of the Tuscans. But I think one thing that's very important to remember about the term is that it does not imply some sort of shadow between dark and light. It implies a clarity that is visible inside of darkness. We tend to think in either or terms, black versus white. I think it's gotten us into terrible trouble. So I wish upon you all a heartfelt Italian chiaroscuro. Why don't we take just a few minutes and then we'll come back to the open reading.